There is a moment, and perhaps you know it well, when the life you were chasing stops making sense. Not gradually, not with warning, but suddenly, as though someone turned on a light in a room you had been navigating by memory for years. You can see everything now. The furniture of your ambitions, the architecture of your striving, the carefully arranged objects of your desire. And what you feel, standing in that sudden clarity, is not triumph. It is not peace. It is something closer to paralysis. You thought waking up would feel like arriving. Instead, it feels like the ground has disappeared beneath your feet, and you are standing in mid-air, unsure whether to step forward or back, unsure even what forward and back mean anymore. You worked so hard to see clearly. You read the books, sat in the silence, questioned your assumptions, peeled back the layers of conditioned thinking. And now that you can see, you find yourself unable to move. The things that once drove you forward, the goals, the plans, the hunger to achieve and become, they feel hollow in a way you cannot explain to the people around you. They look at you with concern. They ask what happened. They suggest you might be depressed. But you know it is not depression, at least not in the ordinary sense. It is something stranger and more disorienting. It is the particular exhaustion of someone who has seen through the game but has not yet found a reason to keep playing. What you are experiencing has a name, though not many people use it accurately. It is called post-awakening collapse, or sometimes spiritual disillusionment. But those phrases carry a dramatic weight that does not quite match the quiet, bewildered flatness of what you are actually feeling. You are not in crisis. You are not broken. What you are is genuinely confused in the most honest and philosophically honest sense of that word. The map you were using to navigate your life no longer corresponds to the territory you can now see. And without a map, most human beings do not simply wander forward with cheerful curiosity. They stop. They sit down. They wonder why anyone would bother walking at all. I want to talk with you about this today, not to offer you a shortcut back to motivation, not to hand you a new set of goals to chase so you can feel purposeful again. That would be a kind of betrayal of the very clarity you have worked so hard to find. Instead, I want to examine with you what is actually happening when awakening strips away motivation, why this is not a malfunction, but a necessary passage, and what a different relationship to action might look like on the other side of this particular darkness. Hannah Arendt, who was not a spiritual teacher in any conventional sense but was one of the most penetrating analysts of the human condition in the 20th century, has something profound to say about this. She understood, through a different kind of philosophical journey, what happens when a person can no longer accept the unexamined life, but has not yet discovered what a genuinely examined life is for. If this perspective is beginning to open something up for you, something you have been trying to understand about your own experience, consider subscribing. I explore these territories every week, and I would love to have you along for the journey. To understand why awakening so reliably collapses motivation, we need to look honestly at where most human motivation actually comes from. Not where we tell ourselves it comes from, not the noble stories we construct about pursuing meaning or serving others or building something lasting, but the actual psychological machinery that gets most people out of bed and moving through their days. The uncomfortable truth is that a very large portion of ordinary human motivation is driven not by genuine desire, but by fear. Fear of falling behind. Fear of being seen as inadequate. Fear of the emptiness that might appear if you stopped filling your days with activity and purpose. Fear of what you might find if you sat still long enough with yourself. This is not a criticism. It is simply an observation about how the human animal tends to function when it has not examined its own driving forces. We are remarkably good at converting our anxieties into goals, at clothing our fears in the respectable garments of ambition and aspiration, and then forgetting that we did so. The person who works 70 hours a week building a company may genuinely believe they are driven by passion for their vision, and perhaps they are, in part. But if you examine the thing carefully, if you trace the urgency back to its root, you often find something that feels less like passion and more like a desperate need to prove something to someone, perhaps to a parent who doubted them, perhaps to a culture that defines worth through achievement, perhaps to a younger version of themselves who felt powerless and small. This is what awakening disturbs. Not just the surface beliefs we hold about the world, but the deeper operational software that runs our lives below the level of conscious awareness. When you begin to see clearly, when you start to recognize the patterns of conditioning that have been driving you, one of the first things you notice is that many of your goals were never really yours. They were adopted, inherited, absorbed from the culture around you, before you had the capacity to evaluate them. The career ladder you have been climbing, was that your ladder? The version of success you have been pursuing, did you choose that vision, or did it choose you? The relationship template you have been trying to fulfill, where exactly did that template come from? These are not comfortable questions. They do not have comfortable answers. And when you begin to take them seriously, something remarkable and unsettling happens. The fuel that was running your life begins to run out. I know many of you watching this have never said out loud what you are actually feeling. You have described it to yourself as laziness or burnout, or perhaps some kind of failure of character. You have tried to push through it. You have made lists and set new intentions, and told yourself that you just need to find the right goal, the right purpose, the right reason to get going again. But here is what I want you to understand. The moment you acknowledge what is really happening, the moment you name it as something other than a personal failing, something shifts. You stop fighting the wrong enemy. So let me ask you directly, when did you first notice that the things you used to care about had lost their pull? Was it sudden, like a light going out, or was it a slow fading, so gradual you barely noticed until one day you looked up and the brightness was simply gone? I want you to share that in the comments below, not because I need your engagement, but because someone else is watching this right now who thinks they are alone in this experience. They need to see your words. They need to know this is real and it has a name and they are not broken. If putting it into words feels too hard right now, just type this: I lost the thread. Those 4 words are enough, because when you do, you give someone else permission to say the same. Your honesty in naming this creates space for others to stop pretending, and that matters more than you know. Hannah Arendt spent much of her intellectual life examining what she called the human condition, the basic circumstances and activities that define what it means to be human. In her most important work, she distinguished between 3 fundamental types of human activity: labor, which is the biological process of sustaining life; work, which is the creation of objects and structures that outlast a single life; and action, which is the realm of politics and genuine human freedom, the capacity to begin something new, to set something in motion that could not have been predicted from what came before. What is striking about this framework, when you look at it carefully, is how much of what we ordinarily call motivation falls into the first 2 categories and how rarely we act in the third. Most of what drives us, the need to earn money to survive, the need to build careers and reputations and relationships that have some lasting structure, is either labor in Arendt's sense or work. It is necessary, it is often deeply meaningful, but it is not the same as genuine action. Genuine action, in Arendt's view, requires a quality of attention and freedom that is difficult to maintain when you are simply executing a program that was laid down before you started thinking clearly. The reason this matters for what you are experiencing is this: when awakening strips away the unconscious programs that were driving your motivation, what collapses first is precisely the labor and the work, the getting things done part of your life that was running on autopilot. What remains, or what becomes possible, is something Arendt would have recognized as closer to genuine action. But action, in her sense, is not comfortable. It is not something you can plan for or control. It emerges from the encounter between who you genuinely are and the world you genuinely find yourself in, and it requires a degree of presence and openness that is incompatible with the anxious forward motion that characterized your pre-awakening life. In other words, the collapse of ordinary motivation is not the end of your capacity for meaningful activity. It is the clearing of ground where something more genuine can eventually take root. But the clearing is brutal, and it is slow, and it looks from the inside almost indistinguishable from despair. Here is an analogy that might illuminate what I am trying to say. Imagine you have been navigating a long journey through a fog. You cannot see more than a few feet ahead, but you have a compass, and the compass says go north, so you go north. The fog is uncomfortable, but the compass provides direction. Now imagine the fog lifts. Suddenly, you can see the full landscape around you. Mountains in the distance, a river to your left, a forest behind you. And you notice with a kind of dawning horror that the compass you have been following is slightly magnetized by a local anomaly in the rock beneath your feet, and it has been pointing not quite north, but somewhat northeast, which means you are standing not where you thought you were, but somewhere slightly different, and the path ahead that made sense when you could not see is now clearly leading you toward a cliff you could not previously see. The fog lifting has not simply clarified your direction, it has revealed that your direction was never quite what you thought. And now you must decide, do you keep walking northeast because that is what you have been doing, or do you stop and genuinely recalculate, even though stopping feels like giving up, even though the people who are still in their fog cannot understand why you have stopped walking? This is the situation you are in after awakening. You can see the cliff. You cannot unsee it. And the particular kind of motivation that once carried you forward, that confident not quite northward momentum, has failed because it depended on not being able to see clearly. The question is not how to get that motivation back. The question is what you do with clear sight. What kind of movement becomes possible and even natural when you are no longer being pushed forward by unconscious fear and conditioned desire, when you are instead responding to what you can actually see? Arendt had a concept she described as natality, the simple but profound fact that every human being comes into the world as a new beginning, a source of unprecedented action, a point of genuine novelty in the fabric of what has been. She saw this capacity for beginning as the deepest ground of human freedom, the thing that cannot be fully explained or predicted from what came before. Natality is not about optimism. It is not a cheerful belief that things will get better. It is a recognition that as long as you are alive and conscious, you carry within you the possibility of initiating something that has not existed before. Not in the grandiose sense of changing the world, though that sometimes happens, but in the more immediate sense that the next moment of your life has not been written yet, and the next choice you make emerges from who you genuinely are in this moment, which is always slightly different from who you were before. The reason this matters for post-awakening collapse is that natality only becomes accessible when you stop executing the old programs. When you are running on autopilot, when your motivation is largely a product of fear and conditioning, the capacity for genuine beginning is suppressed. You are not starting things, you are continuing things. You are not choosing, you are following a script. The collapse of motivation is painful precisely because you are withdrawing from the script. But the withdrawal is what makes room for genuine initiation. The flat, directionless quality of post-awakening life is not the absence of your capacity for action. It is the clearing of everything that was substituting for it. But I want to be honest with you, because I think you deserve honesty more than you deserve comfort. This clearing can take a very long time. There is no precise schedule for how long the disorientation lasts. Some people find their footing again within months. For others, it takes years. And during that time, life does not simply pause to wait for you. You have bills to pay. You have relationships to maintain. You have obligations that do not care about your philosophical predicament. And navigating those obligations while in the middle of a motivational collapse is one of the harder things a person can do. What helps is not forcing yourself back into the old patterns of striving and achieving, which only deepens the exhaustion, but rather developing a different relationship to the activity that life requires of you. Here is what that looks like in practice, or at least what it has looked like in the lives of people I have thought carefully about, and in some cases witnessed. There is a quality of attention that becomes available when you are no longer straining toward a destination. Call it presence, though that word has been used so often in spiritual circles that it has nearly lost its meaning. What I mean is something more precise, the capacity to engage fully with whatever is actually in front of you, not because it is leading somewhere, not because it is building towards some future state of affairs, but because it is what is real right now. This is not a passive quality. It is not resignation or acceptance in the sense of giving up. It is something more like what a craftsperson feels when they are fully absorbed in the work of their hands, not thinking about what the finished object will mean for their career or reputation, not comparing themselves to other craftspeople, simply attending to the grain of the wood or the temperature of the clay, or the particular challenge this piece presents at this moment. There is genuine engagement in that state, genuine interest, even joy. But it does not look like the striving motivation that preceded it. It does not feel like urgency or ambition. It feels quieter and more sustainable. And at first, to someone who has been running on adrenaline for years, it can feel like not enough. The philosophical tradition has a name for this mode of engagement, though different traditions name it differently. Arendt, drawing on the ancient Greeks, distinguished between the vita activa, the life of action and engagement in the world, and the vita contemplativa, the life of thought and inner attention. The Western tradition, she argued, had for centuries privileged the contemplative over the active, treating thought as higher and action as somehow lesser. She wanted to rehabilitate action, to restore its dignity and its philosophical importance. But what I think she also understood, though she did not always make it explicit, is that the highest form of action is not opposed to contemplation, but emerges from it. The person who has genuinely thought, who has genuinely examined their situation and understood the forces acting upon them and within them, acts differently than the person who has never questioned their programming. Their action is less driven, less anxious, less compulsive, and perhaps slower to mobilize, but it is more genuinely theirs. It comes from somewhere real. What you are living through right now, the loss of the old motivation, the flatness and confusion that follows awakening, is the period between the end of unexamined action and the beginning of examined action. It is the space between the old script and the genuine response. It is uncomfortable in the way that any genuine passage is uncomfortable. You are not in the old country anymore, but you have not yet arrived at the new one. You are in transit, and transit is disorienting by nature. But you are not lost. You are in the most honest place you have ever been in relation to your own life. Let me talk about something that is rarely discussed in spiritual conversations about this experience, and that is the social dimension of post-awakening collapse. When you lose your conventional motivation, you do not just change your relationship to your own goals and projects. You change your relationship to other people, and particularly to the social systems that previously gave your striving meaning. The game of status and achievement and recognition that most of us are playing, whether we acknowledge it or not, is fundamentally a social game. Its rewards are social rewards. The career advancement means something because other people recognize it as meaningful. The accumulation of material comfort means something because it places you in a particular position within a social hierarchy. Even the spiritual seeking that many people undertake is partly a social project, a way of belonging to a community of seekers, of being recognized by others as someone who takes these things seriously. When awakening strips away the unconscious motivation driving all of this, it also removes the social glue that held it in place. And this can be profoundly isolating. You may find that conversations that used to feel natural now feel hollow. You may find that you can no longer sustain the social performances that previously felt automatic. You may find that you have less patience for the small rituals of status and competition that structure most social interaction. And you may find, more painfully, that people who are important to you do not understand what has happened to you and are not sure they like the person who has emerged. This is real loss, and it is worth naming. The social isolation of post-awakening collapse is not a side effect. It is a feature, though that word makes it sound more benign than it often is. What is actually happening is that your authentic self is coming into contact with a social world that was organized around your inauthentic self, and the friction between those two things is uncomfortable for everyone involved. Arendt, writing about political philosophy, made a distinction that is useful here. She talked about the difference between behavior, which is predictable, rule-following, socially normalized action, and genuine action, which is unpredictable, emerging from the individual's genuine engagement with their situation. Most social life runs on behavior in Arendt's sense. We follow scripts, we fulfill roles, we do what is expected of us in the context of the social structures we inhabit. This is not necessarily bad. Social life requires some degree of predictability and role fulfillment to function at all. But when someone awakens, When someone starts acting from genuine response rather than social script, they disrupt the social fabric in ways that can be threatening to others. Not because they are doing anything harmful, but because their unpredictability, their refusal to simply play the expected role, makes others uncomfortable in ways they cannot always articulate. This is why the people around you may be more disturbed by your post-awakening flatness than you are yourself. You are living through a transition that is internally coherent, even if it is externally confusing. But to those who have not undergone a similar shift, your withdrawal from the conventional motivation game can look like depression or laziness, or a kind of spiritual self-indulgence. They may try to help you by pushing you back toward the old goals. They may tell you that you just need to find your purpose again, as though purpose were a thing you misplaced and simply need to look for in the right drawer. This advice is not helpful, but it is usually given with genuine care, and it is worth receiving it with that understanding. If what I am sharing here is landing somewhere true in you, if you have been carrying this alone and this conversation is giving it a shape you could not quite find on your own, I want to invite you into something. I make these videos for people who are done with surface answers, people who have tried the conventional approaches and found them wanting, who are ready to think more carefully about their own experience rather than just manage it. If that describes you, please subscribe, not because you need another voice telling you what to do, but because this kind of inquiry goes deeper when we do it together, and I would genuinely be honored to have your company on this journey. And if this particular exploration has touched something real for you, tell me in the comments, tell me where you are in this passage. Tell me what the collapse of your old motivation has been like for you. I read every comment, and I find that what you share often illuminates things I had not considered, threads I had not noticed, dimensions of this experience that only become visible through many different lives. Now I want to turn to something that is, I think, the most difficult and most important aspect of what you are navigating. It concerns the question of meaning itself, and why the conventional approaches to meaning fail so completely for someone who has genuinely awakened to the constructed nature of the meanings they have been living by. Most of what passes for meaning in ordinary human life is what we might call borrowed meaning. We borrow it from our culture, from our families, from the social structures we inhabit. The meaning of a career is borrowed from a culture that equates work with worth. The meaning of romantic love is borrowed from a set of narratives about fulfillment and completion that were written long before you arrived. The meaning of political engagement is borrowed from a story about progress and change that may or may not correspond to the actual dynamics of social transformation. None of this is dishonest exactly. Human beings are meaning-making animals, and we construct meaning through narrative and social consensus. But there is a profound difference between borrowed meaning and what we might call earned meaning, meaning that has been tested against reality and survived. When awakening occurs, borrowed meaning tends to collapse. The career that was meaningful because the culture said it was meaningful is now revealed as exactly that, a cultural designation rather than an intrinsic property of the work. The relationship that was meaningful because it fulfilled a socially sanctioned template is now visible as exactly that, a structure rather than a ground. This is devastating. And the reason it is devastating is that most people have no experience of earned meaning, meaning that has been excavated from actual encounter with reality rather than absorbed from the cultural environment. They have been sustained by borrowed meaning their entire lives, and when the borrowing is revealed, they find themselves with nothing. This is the void at the center of post-awakening collapse. Not the absence of motivation exactly, but the absence of the meaning structure that made motivation make sense. But here is what I want you to consider carefully. The void is not empty. It only looks empty when you approach it with the expectations built by borrowed meaning. When you expect meaning to arrive in the form of a clear direction, a compelling goal, a purpose that feels large and important and socially recognizable, the void appears to contain nothing. But if you approach it differently, if you bring to it the quality of attention I was describing earlier, the capacity for genuine presence with what is actually here, you often find something unexpected. You find small, precise, actual engagements that carry a quality of aliveness. A conversation that feels genuinely interesting, not because it is advancing an agenda, but because two people are actually thinking together. A piece of work done with care, not for its career implications, but because the quality of the work itself matters to you. A moment of being with another person in their difficulty that is real rather than performative. These small enlivenments are the seeds of earned meaning. They are modest in their scale. They do not arrive with the fanfare of a great purpose, but they are genuine in a way that borrowed meaning is not. And when you begin to trust them, when you begin to build your engagement with life around them rather than around the larger borrowed structures that have collapsed, something begins to shift. Arendt wrote about what she called the banality of evil, her famous phrase for describing the unremarkable, bureaucratic quality of the evil perpetrated by figures like Adolf Eichmann, who was not a monster, but simply a thoughtless executor of systems he had never examined. What struck her was not the extraordinary nature of the evil, but its ordinariness, its mechanical quality, its complete absence of genuine thought. The perpetrators were not acting from genuine engagement with their situation. They were following programs, executing scripts, doing what the system required without ever stopping to think about what they were actually doing. I want to suggest, with appropriate care about the weight of that comparison, that a parallel structure exists in ordinary human striving that we might call the banality of seeking. Most of us, for most of our lives, are in a condition not unlike Eichmann's in this specific structural sense. We are executing programs we have never examined, following scripts we did not write, participating in systems whose actual effects we have not thought carefully about. We call it ambition, we call it purpose, we call it building a life, but much of the time it is simply the mechanical reproduction of cultural patterns, carried forward by the energy of unconscious anxiety, never questioned, never genuinely chosen. Awakening in this frame is the beginning of genuine thought, and genuine thought, as Arendt understood, is always disruptive. It does not produce comfortable certainties. It does not generate a clear action plan. What it produces is what Arendt called the two-in-one, the internal dialogue of a person thinking carefully about their own situation, the conversation between the self that asks and the self that is questioned. This dialogue is uncomfortable. It does not produce immediate results, but it is the beginning of what she called the examined life, the only kind of life she thought was genuinely worth living. What does this mean for your post-awakening flatness? It means that the absence of the old motivation is not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be inhabited. The flatness is what thinking feels like when it is not yet ready to become action. It is the period of genuine examination, the internal audit of everything that was previously running on automatic. It is not pleasant, but it is necessary. And the people who try to escape it too quickly, who rush back to conventional striving before the examination is complete, often find themselves running the same old programs with a slightly different surface, calling them something new, but recognizing with a sinking feeling that nothing has fundamentally changed. The philosopher Simone Weil, who was a contemporary and in some ways a counterpart to Arendt, wrote about a quality she called attention, which she understood as the opposite of the willful forcing of one's way through experience. True attention, in Weil's sense, is a kind of active waiting, a receptive quality of consciousness that neither imposes itself on experience nor withdraws from it, but remains present and available to what is actually here. She saw this quality as the foundation of genuine compassion, genuine learning, and genuine relationship with reality. She also saw it as deeply difficult to cultivate, precisely because it is so contrary to the anxious, effortful quality of ordinary motivation. You cannot force attention in Weil's sense. You can only remove the obstacles to it. And the obstacles are exactly what the post-awakening collapse is removing: the compulsive striving, the borrowed meaning, the anxious forward motion that was keeping you from being genuinely present with your own life. This is perhaps the deepest thing I can say to you about what you are experiencing. The loss of motivation that you are grieving is actually a clearing of the ground for a different kind of presence. Not a kind of presence that will produce spectacular achievements or fill your life with the sense of burning purpose that motivational culture promises, but a presence that is real, a presence that is genuinely yours, a presence that, when it eventually does move into action, moves from somewhere actual rather than somewhere borrowed. There is something else worth understanding about this passage, and it concerns time. Our ordinary relationship to time is organized almost entirely around the future. We work toward goals that exist in a future that has not happened yet. We motivate ourselves with imagined future states, the future promotion, the future relationship, the future version of ourselves who will have figured everything out. This future orientation is so deeply embedded in ordinary human consciousness that most people are not even aware of it as an orientation. It simply feels like how life works, like reality itself has a directional quality pointing toward what we are trying to achieve. When awakening occurs, this future orientation tends to lose its grip, not because the future stops existing, but because you can see clearly that the future you have been constructing in your imagination is largely a projection of your current anxieties and desires, and not a reliable guide to what will actually matter when you get there. The future you imagined at 20 is not the future you would have chosen at 30. The person you are going to become has been revised so many times that the original vision is barely recognizable. And once you see this, the urgency that came from the imagined future becomes harder to sustain. What you are left with is the present. Not the present as a consolation prize for people who cannot manage future orientation, not the present as a spiritual catchphrase, but the present as the actual location of your life. This is where you are. This moment, this room, this breath, this specific encounter with these specific thoughts. Everything else is memory or imagination, and memory and imagination are real experiences, but they are present experiences of the past and the future, not the past and the future themselves. You are always here. You have never been anywhere else. And a life built around genuine presence to here is a fundamentally different project from a life built around the pursuit of an imagined future state. It is quieter, often. It is less dramatic. It does not generate the sense of trajectory and momentum that conventional motivation produces, but it is real in a way that trajectory and momentum are not. I want to return, as I promised at the beginning, to the question I posed in a different way then. What does it mean to be motivated from the other side of awakening? What does action look like when it emerges from genuine presence rather than borrowed meaning and unconscious anxiety? I do not think there is a single answer to this question. I think the answer is different for every person, because genuine action, in Arendt's sense, emerges from the unique individual that each person actually is, not from the generic cultural templates we have all inherited. But I can say some things about the quality of this different motivation that seem to hold across different lives and different circumstances. It tends to be quieter than the old motivation. It does not arrive with the urgency of anxiety or the fire of ambition. It comes more like a question that insists on being answered, or a pull towards something that seems genuinely interesting rather than genuinely impressive. It is often difficult to explain to others, because it is not organized around the legible goals of career and achievement and social recognition. It may lead you somewhere that looks, from the outside, less successful than where you were headed before. It is frequently uncomfortable, not because it is driven by anxiety, but because it requires genuine courage, the courage to act from who you actually are, rather than who you have been performing yourself to be. And it has a quality of continuity to it, a sense that each genuine action builds on the last, not because you planned it that way, but because they all emerge from the same source, the same fundamental orientation toward what is real. This is what Arendt meant by action in the fullest sense, and this is what becomes possible when you stop running on the old programs. Not immediately, not without the long passage through the flatness and confusion of post-awakening collapse, but eventually, when the examination is complete enough, and the ground is clear enough, and the quality of your attention has become honest enough, you begin to notice the small enlivenments again, the things that actually interest you, not the things you were supposed to be interested in. The contributions you can actually make, not the contributions that would generate the most recognition. The life that is genuinely yours, not the life you were performing for an audience that was never really watching as carefully as you feared. You came to this video because something in you recognized the description of what you have been living through. You came because the conventional explanations, the burnout theory, the depression hypothesis, the "you just need to find your purpose again" advice, have not captured what is actually happening to you. I hope what I have offered here is a more honest account. Not a solution, because this is not a problem that can be solved in the ordinary sense, but a different way of understanding what you are in so that you can inhabit it with less fear and more trust in the process that is unfolding. You are not broken. You are not lost. You are in the most important passage of your interior life, the passage from the unexamined to the examined, from the borrowed to the earned, from the mechanical to the genuinely responsive. It is slow, it is uncomfortable, and it is entirely worth it. If what I have been exploring here has given shape to something you have been carrying alone, I want you to know that this channel exists precisely for people who are in this territory. People who are done with the surface and willing to go deeper, even when deeper is harder. I create these videos for those of us who cannot go back to the old certainties and have not yet found what comes next. If that is where you are, please subscribe. Not because I have all the answers, but because the journey of genuine understanding is better when you do not have to walk it entirely alone. There are others here who are asking the same questions, sitting with the same confusion, and learning slowly and honestly to act from somewhere real. I would be honored to have you among them, and please share in the comments what this landed for you. Tell me where you are in this passage. Your reflection helps others name what they are also experiencing, and that naming, that breaking of the silence around this particular kind of suffering, is itself a form of the action I have been describing. A genuine response to what is real, shared honestly with others who need to hear it. There is a detail from Arendt's life that has always stayed with me. After the publication of her report on the Eichmann trial, she faced enormous criticism, much of it painfully personal. Former friends turned against her. Community that had been central to her life withdrew, and she continued to think and to write and to follow the thread of genuine inquiry wherever it led, even when that thread took her somewhere most people found uncomfortable. She did not stop because the costs were high. She did not return to safer positions to recover the approval she had lost. She kept going, not from stubbornness or ego, but because she had made a commitment to genuine thought over social comfort, and she could not undo that commitment without betraying something central to who she was. This is what the examined life asks of you. Not spectacular courage most of the time, but a quiet, sustained willingness to remain faithful to what you have actually seen, even when the old motivations have gone quiet and the new ones have not yet found their voice. You have already done the hard part. You have already awakened. The rest is learning to live in the light you have earned.